Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we are gonna do a classic recipe. We're gonna make some meatballs. Now, is this an Italian dish or is it an Italian-American? Did this start here in America or way back in Italy? Well, the truth is that meatballs or form of meatballs have been made in Italy, but in Italy when they make meatballs or polpette, they actually don't serve it with pasta. They eat it by itself. So we're gonna do a classic, just a traditional meatball, and we're gonna start by using two kinds of meat. I've got ground pork and ground sirloin. I like to get a cut of meat, so instead of ground beef could be like the chuck cut, the sirloin cut, I don't even know what kind of cut, all mixed together. And really you can also get like 400 different cow DNA in ground beef. So I would rather know that I'm getting the chuck cut or the sirloin cut, and sirloin's gonna give you that flavor of a sirloin steak. So we're gonna get a lot of nice flavor out of a sirloin, ground sirloin instead of a ground beef. So we're gonna combine these two together. That's the first thing. And I'm gonna get my hands dirty. And as I do this, we're just trying to combine the two meats together, but we don't want to compress it or smush it, because what ends up happening is your meatballs will be dense if that happens. So just kind of get it mixed together. And then our next step is to add all of our other ingredients. So I've got onion, I've got Parmesan, garlic, breadcrumbs, egg, milk, because when we add the breadcrumbs, we don't want this to be dry, so that's gonna add our moisture, and Italian seasoning. So let's make a little well, and let's start with our Italian seasoning. And you probably have a question about, when you make your meatball, how do you know if it's seasoned correctly? A little trick is you can actually boil a pot of water and just take a small amount of it and cook it, and then you can taste it to see if the salt content is correctly. You don't have to make the whole batch and be like, oh, it's undersalted. You can take a little piece and kind of taste it that way. We've got Parmesan, let's add our garlic. You do not have to pre-soften the onions, they'll cook while they're in the meatballs. So no pre-cooking there. Onion, I'm gonna mix that together, and then we'll add our breadcrumbs. You need egg so that it'll bind together. And then we've got that milk just to make sure that we've got the right moisture content in our meatballs. Okay, let's add some breadcrumbs. A little bit of milk. You can always add more. And then I'm gonna wash my hands and crack these eggs. So I want to add one more ingredient to this. I like to add fresh parsley because that's kind of just all one color, and I like to have vibrancy and brightness in my food. So let's add some fresh parsley. And that'll go nice with the Italian seasoning that had basil, rosemary, parsley, dried parsley. But look, doesn't that pretty with the green in the meatballs mixture? Okay, now, if you watched my very first show, we made arancini, which is a risotto ball. And I mentioned it then, and I'm gonna mention it again. I don't like my balls to be too big to fit in your mouth. So when we make these, I like to make them about a tablespoon size. Now there's two ways you can cook these. You can bake them in the oven and then add them to your sauce, or you can cook them in the sauce. I like to bake them because you can get a nice brown crust, and I'm for sure make sure they're cooked through. I also like it because it holds its shape. A lot of times when you put it in a pan and you're trying to brown it, it browns on this side, right? And then you flip it and it gets flat. So then you have a misshapen meatball. So I prefer to bake mine. So we're gonna roll out, like I said, about a tablespoon. Use a scoop if you're not sure you can make them all the same size. And we're gonna put our oven at 500 degrees. We're gonna let them brown for about 10-15 minutes. Once they're brown, we're gonna add them to a marinara sauce and let them finish cooking in the sauce. I've got the meatballs in the oven at 500. We're gonna get those nice and brown. I've got some marinara, something that I always keep in my refrigerator made. My recipe's on my website. I've got some marinara pre-made. We're gonna warm it up, and then once those are browned, we'll bring everything together. Interesting fact though I wanted to mention, I talked about the size of meatballs. And the reason that meatballs in America are so large is when Italians immigrated to America, at the time, believe it or not, with today's crazy grocery prices, back then, ground beef was very plentiful and it was actually one of the cheapest commodities you could get. So it was available. They were trying to make food that was traditional to Italy, and so the meatballs just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So you can see how nice and brown the oven searing made these meatballs, and they've retained their shape. Now, I do want to let them simmer in the sauce though, because I want the flavor of the meatballs to penetrate that sauce and come together. So I'm gonna turn this on low, medium low to low, just depending on how hot, like that's my medium. I think I want it halfway in between. Just so I'm gonna cover it, just so it really can simmer and let those flavors merge, and then we will have our meatballs. Our meatballs have been simmering in the sauce. We are ready to plate. Now, if you want to eat this with pasta, it is not a tragedy. It's not illegal. We can totally do that. But to keep it traditionally Italian today, we're just gonna serve them as is. And I like things saucy. So a little extra sauce is awesome. And then to make this just a little prettier, I'm gonna put, you could put Parmesan on this if you'd like, or Pecorino. I'm gonna actually just put some parsley. Let's be fancy. Ooh. And we've got meatballs, traditionally Italian. All right, moving on to dessert. We talked about how meatballs, whether they are American or were they Italian, and we talked about how they kind of started in Italy, but really they're an Italian-American food. This recipe is my favorite cake. It's an Italian cream cake, but guess what? This is Italian-American. You won't find Italian cream cake in Italy. All right, to start, in this recipe, we're actually using butter and shortening. Now, I got a buttered flavor shortening for this recipe. I also try to get organic lard or shortening. I try to stay away from some of those other brands where it's, you know, saturated chemical fat. One for flavor and also just for health purposes. So let's get our butter and sugar together. We're gonna get those creamed. It would help if I lifted the bowl up. While those are creaming together, let's get our cake pan ready. So, trick of mine is I save my wrappers from my butter to grease my cake pans or pie tins because there's residual butter on there. So this has to be buttered and floured. So you could do this in a rectangular 9x13. I like to have layered cake, plus it's extra frosting. So I'm gonna use 2 9-inch rounds. And then flour. And just kind of shake it around. And then to get your edges, I just do it over the other cake pan because that's where the flour is gonna go. Then I kind of tap any extra out of the pan and we'll put these over here by the oven. Get this one floured. That's getting light and fluffy. Have I gotten flour on me yet? I wore a pattern dress, so this time you can't tell. Okay, so now that this is light and fluffy, we're gonna add our eggs one at a time. If you've watched me baking, you're kind of gonna notice that there's like the same process. We always start by creaming the sugar, then you add the eggs, then you add your flavorings, then you mix your dry ingredients together and incorporate your liquid with the flour in equal parts. So once you kind of get that order down, baking becomes really easy. So one egg at a time, let that kind of really get incorporated. Okay. We can add our vanilla. Over here is my flour, salt, baking powder. It's kind of humid in Texas today, if you can't tell. My hair's definitely feeling it. We're gonna whisk those together. And now that that is all whipped together, the first thing I do before I add this, I do want to scrape down the sides of the mixer because I've got a chunk of butter and sugar up there that hasn't mixed in. There's some stuff at the top that didn't get mixed in. So we want to make sure everything's fully incorporated. Ooh, I got excited there for a second. Okay, so flour and buttermilk alternately. A little bit of flour. You know how they say if you like spill sugar, you're supposed to throw it over your left shoulder? I wonder if doing that with flour is just as much good luck. If so, I'm a very lucky girl. So maybe like a third of each ingredient until it all comes together. And again, we'll probably have to scrape down the sides. We've got a really nice batter. Just make sure everything's incorporated. Finish this part of the recipe, we're gonna actually mix in our coconut and our pecans. And yes, that's how you say it. It's pecans, not pecan. I'm gonna do that with the spatula instead of with the paddle on the mixer because I don't want the paddle to crush the nuts more than they're already chopped. Let's scrape that down. Now there's one more step to this batter. We used egg yolks, not the whole egg. We separated the eggs, so we separated the whites and the yolks, and now we are going to whip the egg whites. We're gonna fold that mixture in, and that's gonna create air pockets and a light and fluffy texture to this cake. Okay, I whipped the egg whites. You can see they're kind of like a soft to medium peak. They just pulled up a little bit. It's not a stiff peak because they don't really hold, but we're gonna fold this in, not stir it, because by folding it, we'll keep the fluffiness of the egg whites. We don't wanna defeat or deflate our egg whites by stirring this in. So let's fold it. And that just means you fold it over, you turn a quarter of a turn, you fold it again. We'll get this incorporated. And let's get it in our cake pans. These are gonna go in a 350-degree oven for 45 minutes. Now, I mentioned that it was humid here in Texas today, so humidity does make a factor when you bake. When it's humid, it may take your cakes or cookies a little bit longer to bake. But you know your oven, you know your kitchen, so I would set the timer for about 45 minutes and then just check it. If you have to leave it in a little bit longer, you can do that. And the way you test a cake to see if it's done, you take a Q-tip or some kind of skewer, like a little wooden pick, slide it down the center. If the batter sticks to it coming up, it's still raw in the center. You want it to come out clean. And then you know your cake is done. Our cake is in the oven, so let's get our frosting ready. This is a very easy buttercream, so to speak. We're gonna start with 2 packages of cream cheese. I love a good cream cheese buttercream. Half a stick of butter. We're gonna cream these together. Make sure they're well combined. And then add our vanilla. And then so we don't have a Jennifer explosion of powdered sugar all over me and the kitchen, let's turn it down. And we're gonna do 5 cups, so this is 1 cup. And you know, as you're making this recipe, if for some reason it looks like it's gonna be too thick, just add like a tablespoon of milk and it'll loosen it back up. But do a tablespoon at a time so it doesn't become too runny. Because believe it or not, even though this looks like a lot of powdered sugar, it does incorporate nicely into the cream cheese and the butter. So once you have that all combined, we have our frosting. The cakes will come out. We're gonna cool them down because obviously if you put frosting on a hot cake, it'll melt. And we will frost our double layer Italian cream cake. Our Italian cream cake came out of the oven. We let it cool. I've frosted it. I put some pecans on it. Now, I've told you many times I am not a pastry chef, and Decorating is definitely not my strong point, but I can guarantee this cake tastes gorgeous, even though it looks like I probably drank a whole bottle of wine while I was trying to frost it. But for this recipe and for the meatballs that we made earlier, please go to jenniferbasil.com, follow me on social media, and enjoy.